Right.
That like that made everything possible.
Yeah. Well, that is the only saving grace of the concept of white privilege, is that we do have to recognize that some people got a really good deal and some people got a really terrible deal. But the only reason why white privilege is even something to consider is that racism is real. White privilege is not, if the world was Bari Weiss, but
there's all kinds of privilege, right?
Like, but what I was going to say is, if the world was people like you or people like Jamie, we would never have to worry about racism because it wouldn't even be a consideration. Jamie's on Black Twitter every day. Loves
Jamie,
Black
what are
people.
you doing over there?
It's just being a producer.
Working.
Yeah. But you know what I'm saying? Like, if it was no racism, that concept would be totally irrelevant, and what we would be concentrating on is, you know, who's making the best buildings, who's making the best music, what are the contributions to culture. We wouldn't care about if they were coming from Asian people or West Indian people. We wouldn't care.
But I think the contribution of the left to make people recognize, privilege of all kinds, that's useful. It's actually useful to think about that. What is not useful is to say, because you are X, Y, or Z thing, therefore you're out.
Yes.
Therefore you have no stake. And therefore, in fact, you have sort of less of a claim on truth and morality.
I'm sure
that's
you're
where it
aware
goes bad.
of what happened recently with the woman from CNN who was on Patriot Radio.
Hilarious. That was that was amazing.
She accused an African-American gentleman who she didn't do
of
her
white
research.
Privilege. Yeah, she didn't Google him.
Instead of arguing the idea or discussing these ideas, and she said, because of your white privilege, it's blinding you. And he was like, explain. He gave her rope too. You know, to me, like as a person who does jujitsu, he like gave her room. He gave her room, and she went right into the choke. She just sank the choke in herself. She explained it even further, and he said, "I hate to break it to you, but I'm black." And she must have just felt her whole life, all of her intellectual credibility just go fucking flush down the toilet. Like, oh my God, you just got exposed. And this is what people love about preposterous thinking. Preposterous thinking, if it's given enough time, it's eventually going to slam into a wall. And that's what we saw. We saw a truck with a fucking brick on the accelerator just slam right into the wall because she thought she had a path that you couldn't stop. And this is the path. It's like if you're playing chess, but you have one super powerful move that it works. It's not like a rook or a queen. No, it has no rules. It just king. That's what she did. Basically, she had this super powerful thing, and it didn't work. And it didn't work because this guy was a part of the very protected class that she was a part of, and she tried
just that way
logic.
of thinking of just like shortcuts to dismissing people.
But no one else could pull that off except a black man or a black woman. If because of who he is, he had the checkmate. Right. He's like, ha ha. And the whole world went, ha ha. Because we've all seen that, but you can't say anything. If I was having this discussion with her and she said, because of your white privilege, I'd have to say, look, okay.
You go through the thing.
Let's unpack that. I fucking hate that word unpack. I hate it because it's always brought out by people who really aren't unpacking shit. They're just explaining to you how their ideology trumps your ideology. And it's almost always like this preposterous way of describing things. Let me unpack that for you. Oh, fuck you. But he didn't have to. He didn't have to say that. He said, I'm black. And that was the ultimate unpacking. Boom. Whether he's right or she's right, it's like, those words, white privilege, that creates so many fucking headaches.
It does, but you think it's real, though.
Yes, it's real.
It is
for sure.
real.
It's real because racists don't target me the way they would target a black person.
Exactly.
That's 100% real.
It is real. It just gets used in this sloppy way, and it gets used to dismiss people.
Yes.
And I don't think that's useful.
And the real problem is not white privilege. The real problem is racists, actual racists. That's the real problem. And if there was no racist, that white privilege wouldn't be a thing. It's only a thing because of racists, and it's only a thing with racists. Without racists, it doesn't exist. The problem with African Americans or Asians Asians is the real, like, this is a weird one, right? Like the Harvard thing, where Asians are denied entry into Harvard with the same standards that white people have. Like
because of racism.
Because of racism.
Yes.
Because they're good. because they study so hard and they do
But if you
so
look
well.
but if you look at that lawsuit and the language that the school used to sort of describe them as like
Yes.
antisocial and robotic and all of these stereotypes,
so awful.
it's crazy.
It's so crazy.
People should read Wesley Yang on this. He's a really interesting writer about this.
Who?
Wesley Yang, you should have him on.
I would
He
love
wrote
to.
a book of essays called, I think it's actually called The Souls of Yellow Folk this year. I'll connect you to him.
He's
He's just interesting on this.
I used to teach Taekwondo for a living, and
Yeah.
I was around a lot of Korean people. And when I learned Taekwondo from a Korean man. When I learned and I was around so many Korean people, I was stunned by the work ethic that exists in these families, and the humbleness and the just like the way it was almost expected that you never brag and that you work harder than anybody. And I had a friend who was on the U.S. Taekwondo team to compete in the Olympic Games. He was working on his schoolwork. He was going through his residency, so he's probably working on schoolwork 10 to 12 hours a day. In between classes, he would put his book bag on. He would fill his book bag up with books and run the stairs at the university up and down. And then he would come to the gym at night and train. And then he would travel
Oh my God.
to compete with the world team. And all the meanwhile, he was in college. He was going through
amazing.
medical school. I mean, he had bags under his eyes you could stuff Christmas trees in. It was fucking insane. This guy was always tired. But the work ethic that he had was just, I didn't have 1/10 of that work ethic. It was impossible to ignore. And he was so spread thin and so tired all the time, but he kept working. And he would talk about his culture, and he would talk about his family and what his dad expected of him. Like, he's like, man, in my house like that, you just fucking did it. Like, there's not like, oh, I feel tired today. Fuck you, get up, go to work. But that attitude has allowed so many Asian people that discipline and just this culture of performance and of achievement where it's so cherished, that has allowed so many Asian people to excel in academia. And the fact that Harvard somehow or another steps in and says, well, we're gonna make it more difficult for you because you work so hard. That is so crazy and so weird. It's so weird that they, as this, I mean, if you think about institutions of higher learning, Harvard is the first one you think about. It's number one. It's number one. Like, oh, he graduated from Harvard. Oh, whoa.
Done.
Right? Harvard.
It's the H-bomb.
Yeah. And to have them so blinded
It's amazing.
that they will be racist against the best performers because they're performing too well, and there's a disproportionate number of them in the university. So we're going to make it harder. We're going to raise your standards.
Yeah.